So you had just reminded us of the upcoming Howard Jones albums. You let us know that we're not only going to get the debut, but the second album as well.
That's right. They're coming out on the same date. They're both due for release on the 31st of May.
I did not see the news about the second album, so thanks for the heads up. It's now
Yeah, yeah.
officially on my radar, and for others watching. Thanks for joining me on Life and Surround. Today, it is my immense privilege to be talking for several moments with Stephen W. Tayler. This is one of my absolute favorite things to do on this channel, to talk to and to gain insights with favorite audio engineers. And we have someone that I greatly revere, not only for the way he interacts with fans and friends in his like social media presence, but also just like this man's work is all over my collection, not only in multi-channel, but also in stereo. Music is music. So, from mono on up to RO3D, it's all important to me. So this is Stephen W. Tayler. I am going to, as quickly as possible, just give this talk over to him. And so, Mr. Tayler, thank you so much for being on the channel. I am genuinely just thrilled to be able to finally get to talk to you. It's been a while.
Oh, hello, Mike. Yeah, I mean, I've been watching many of your videos in the past, so it's great to finally have a chance to chat and see what you might be interested in.
Heck yeah. So, I've been aware of your work for a number of years. I know we've talked a lot about Rush,
Yeah.
the hope that someday like remixes could happen for Presto and Roll the Bones. But then also like you are all over my multi-channel collection, like in particular, and you just have a massive, massive body of work. So what I would like to do for everyone would be to start, if you will, with an overview of your engineering career, and that can include tracking, being the guy who runs the tapes, stereo or multi-track channel mixing, and
Yeah.
whatever else it is you do to get these
Okay.
releases out.
Okay. Well, I'll try and give a sort of overall view of my career. I mean, believe it or not, this year represents 50 years since I started at Trident Studios in London.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that's coming up in August, but I'm sure I'll probably celebrate the day when it comes around. But I joined Trident as a T-boy quite by luck. I walked in off the street. It's quite an interesting story that I'll go into some other time because there's lots of details that can come along. But I basically was offered a job on the spot. I took it the next day. I decided to stick with it. It was quite hard work being a T-boy because you were a runner. You had to make tea, answer the phone, stay up all night, fetch and carry, make food, and all the rest. But that's a way of testing your stability and your character. After 6 months, I was made what they call back then a tape operator. That was because in those days, there were no remote controls for tape machines. And sometimes the tape machines weren't even in the same room as the engineer and the console. So the tape operator literally is being instructed by the recording engineer, and you run the tape. And they didn't have displays on them. The ones I started with, you had to sort of get a feeling for like going back a minute and, going back to the beginning of the song, you had to mark the tape with Chinagraph pencils and things like that. Anyway, so I became a tape operator, and I started to work on assisting for albums from Mahavishnu Orchestra to Genesis to Brand X, and several other of the more sort of jazz rock fusion kind of bands. And I was a tape op for 18 months. I had a very quick sort of walk up the ladder, the promotion ladder. And again, there's more stories to tell there about how that all came about. But when I started as an engineer, the first album I worked on was for Tommy Bolin, who had been playing with at that time. He had played with James Gang and he'd been on the road with Deep Purple. But this was a solo album. That was the first album I mixed. I didn't record it. 6 months after that, the first album I actually completely mixed from start to finish was for Brand X. And that kind of
I
sort of
probably
kicked
have it
off
in my
this.
collection.
It's Moroccan Roll
Oh,
is
nice.
the
Yeah.
album.
Yeah, I've
Yes,
got
yeah,
that on LP.
yeah, second, yeah. So that started my engineering career. It took me through working with Bruford and UK and Brand X, and quite a few other artists as well. But those were the sort of meaningful ones, and Stomu Yamashita and all kinds of things. And I wound up consequently working on Peter Gabriel's second solo album, Scratch, which I was brought in to resolve some issues with personalities and relationships. And I came in and mixed most of it and completed it.
Didn't he
And
have
then
Robert Fripp as a guest on that one?
he was the co-producer on that,
Oh,
and
wow.
that's
Okay.
part of, and that was part of the reason that there was friction in the production itself.
Well, I can well
But
imagine.
so, but what a great experience. And still, this is all within 2 years of starting my engineering, So I stayed at Trident for only until having started in 74 and started engineering at the in 76. I left in 79. I'd become chief engineer. I'd gone all the way up the ladder. And so I became freelance after that. And that's when I was introduced I was managed by the guy who had managed Brand X for Hit and Run Management, which was the whole sort of Genesis organization. My manager also managed a producer called Rupert Hine.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he decided to put us together and said, "Hey, Steve, you should work with Rupert. Rupert, you should work with Steve." Because I think you'll get on together. And so I started on Rupert's first solo album. Well, no, actually, it wasn't his first solo album, but it was the first one under these circumstances, called Immunity, and that was the beginning of like decades of a partnership with Rupert, a production partnership in which we did his albums. We worked with The Fix, we worked with Saga, we worked with Tina Turner, Stevie Nicks, Rush, Suzanne Vega. It began to get quite sort of diverse and interesting. And Howard
Wow.
Jones, of
So
course.
all groups that I love, and I actually have been turned on to quite a bit of Rupert Hine's solo work based on like your social media posts, but
Yes,
also like these albums that are, that he was involved in as a producer.
yes.
Gosh, like just it's a significant portion of my collection, and I'm sure that's the same for a lot of people that'll be watching this.
Well, as I say, it was we never got stuck in one single genre. That made it quite interesting because on the one hand, we'd work with Krista Berg, who was coming from the sort of folk rock scene, and then you had Saga coming in as more from the progressive side, and the Fix coming in as they were new wave. It's like all these things, but and then of course we and what's quite relevant at the moment is Howard Jones. But so that sort of brought us into the sort of electronic pop of the 80s, and
So
that
if
was
if
quite
I
a
may,
significant.
if I may,
Mm,
so the thing that I've been wanting to talk to you forever, and like your life and my life, we've had,
yeah,
struggles to kind of have the time and the energy. So I noticed recently that Hojo's debut album is being released in 5.1, mixed by yourself, and with some Bob Clearmountain Atmos tracks as a
there's
bonus.
there's like three bonus tracks.
Mm-hmm.
I've done the bulk, the whole album in stereo and 5.1, and incidentally,
Oh, stereo remix
uh
as well.
stereo remix as well. And
Oh, cool.
incidentally, uh, I have a history over the last decade of working with Howard as a visual designer. I have
Yes.
done visuals for his live shows,
So there's a
and
visual back behind you. Is that your own work?
this is actually from the Howard Jones playing in the background
Very cool. I
at
just
the
saw
moment.
him in concert several months ago and was just
Yeah,
absolutely floored. He stole the show from the headliner, the Culture Club. I
really.
was almost
Wow,
ready just
wow.
to go home because he was just in such command of the stage, and just all of the songs were just impactful and flawless. And
Yeah,
oh my gosh, it was an incredible experience. He's so uplifting. Like, I put on his music when I need to get my head in the game, or if I'm a little down and I just need
yeah,
to be hard charging. Like, oh man, I just love his music. And so I saw the announcement for this, this 5.1 release, and that
yes,
that that was you who had mixed it.
right.
And I was just like, oh my God, if there's ever like the universe telling me that, like, I got to reach out to, Steven again, just to see, like, is this time, like, can we talk?
Well,
And so,
this is a great story for me, really, because um, as you know, and some people probably know, I've for the last 7 or 8 years, I have been sort of moving into the world of multi-channel mixing,
yes.
and it's become a thing, and now I'm just doing it constantly, and there's more and more stuff coming, which I can't talk about, that will come to that some
I
other time.
I think I
But
first became familiar with your 5.1 mixing with Bebop Deluxe, probably.
Bebop Deluxe is what started it. It
Okay.
started my relationship with Esoteric Recordings with Mark Powell, we've become very close now. And pretty much every surround project I do is in association with him, coordinating and choosing. And so we have a very close working relationship. Even when sometimes he is, because he works for Esoteric Recordings, part of Cherry Red, uh, but he also works as a kind of consultant and curator for Universal, hence Van de Graaff Generator and Moody Blues, stuff like that. But the thing about Howard Jones, I started working with him in 1983, around the time he'd made his first single with another producer, but he decided to come in to work with Rupert Hine and myself for the album. And so I'd had a consistent relationship with him ever since. I
So
worked on his main
this is
two albums.
Humans Lib, right?
Human Slib was the first album.
Yeah.
And I worked on the second album as well, Dream Into Action, which is also coming out in surround. Um,
Oh,
but I've had lots of in between working with him on various projects, because that was his big moment in terms of profile and being sort of visible. But he's never stopped, and he's never stopped creating. And so I've been involved with him on various bits of albums. I've worked with him live, doing visuals and stuff like that. And that came about because in 2006, Howard invited me. He was doing some remixes with various engineers, and he invited me to do a first 5.1 remix of a track for an EP. And there were I did one or two tracks, I can't remember, but there were two or three other engineers doing 5.1s. And so I was doing it. And while I was doing it, I said, "How are you putting this out?" He said, "It's going out on DVD." So I said to him, "Well, don't you think be nice to have something to look at, something to give atmosphere on the screen with the
yeah.
DVD, rather than just a menu or a screen?" He said, "Okay." So I created abstract visuals. I mean, funnily enough, a bit like the stuff you're seeing in the background here at the moment, for that EP. And this was 2006. And if you like, that was really when I started to sort of dip into the sort of 5.1 remix scene. Although it didn't become a big thing until more like 10 years ago. And so that sort of brought me into working, because the way I hear music, I see it. I actually see music when I'm sort of visioning how it should sound. So anyway, long story short, it's just amazing to be asked, invited to come back and remix an album I originally recorded. This is the
Yes.
first time this has happened 40 years ago. So that's why this is quite exciting. I mean, they're all exciting, all these remixes, but this is particularly fascinating for me, just to go back and see what I was doing 40 years ago.
So how do you think that being an original engineer on the album influences this 5.1 mix that the world's about to hear?
Well, funnily enough, the idea for this came about in 2018. There was an event for the launch of Howard's last sort of box set, which contained these two albums, Humans Lib and Dream Into Action. They were released on CD with extra bonus tracks and an LP and a booklet, and but there was no surround in that box. But we had a launch event at a studio in London with guests. Howard, Rupert Hine, and myself gave a masterclass talking about, how the album came about, and I was demonstrating from the original tapes and talking about it. And I think it was filmed, and that might become available at some point, I hope, because it was a very interesting evening. But I said on that night to the people from the label, I said, I find it a real shame you haven't got surround sound mixes in this box set. I said, what I'd really like to do is to be able to put together a new sort of vision of these albums with the visuals I created for the live shows for Howard, which was 10 years ago, I think I did these visuals.
Yeah.
And I said, and not to include any of the old material, just to go specifically for new versions, because quite often these box sets have the original version. That's been done with Howard. They've done those box sets. So, and I said, what I want to do is I want to turn it into like a continuous story where the tracks actually blend from one to the other, so that it's not just a collection of tracks, and creating moods and atmospheres. Um, Whereas a lot of the original songs had fade outs, because in those days you had to have tracks fade out so it could be played on the radio and things.
Right.
So well, I want to make this a continuous experience with the visuals, and so you put it on and you just sort of get absorbed by it. So that was my, and so what I've tried to do is be faithful to the original sort of arrangements and the vision, but I've just given it a different, just a different picture in a sense. And by doing it in surround, it enables you to do interesting things with the arrangements, which with electronics is you can do a lot of interesting things. With a straight band, you perhaps have to be a little careful how you work with the surround picture.
Sure.
With Howard's electronic stuff, where you've got like you have sort of question and answer vocals. You have a lead vocal and backing vocals reply and stuff like that. So you can do all kinds of things with that.
Got
So
synthesizer arpeggiation going all around. Like, I've been trying to imagine the last few days, like what this is going to sound like, and I just think it's going to be amazing.
On the one hand, in general with surround sound, I don't like to be too gimmicky. I mean, I don't feel that it's worth doing unnecessarily just to sort of prove that you've got multiple channels.
Mm-hmm.
But with a lot of Howard stuff, yes, things do move back to front, side to side, spin around when it's necessary. In this kind of electronic music, you do tend to use a lot of sequencing and then a lot of repeats on those and
Right.
delays and things. And so again, that gives you lots of fun to play around with, how things sit.
I recall
So
reading recently in a book by one of the members of Rush. It could have been Geddy Lee, since he has a book out now, but I've also read a ton of Neil Peart's work.
yep.
And I believe one of them mentioned that it was advised on one of their albums to try to imagine what they want their listeners to see. When a
Yes.
track comes on, like the essential music that we need to get down on tape and get mixed and to present to the listener is going to be effective if it causes them to see something meaningful or something that makes an impact on them, a vision that is just makes an artistic statement. And I'm wondering if that advice may have come from you or Rupert now.
It's hard to say. I mean, we Rupert was very much always trying to advise people to think about the atmosphere and create the picture. And I was always, as I said previously, I see sound. I really do, right
Right.
from the beginning. Often in a very abstract way. It's not like I'm seeing images, but that's why um, a lot of the visuals I've created for Howard's thing that on here, uh, they are either abstract or just sort of effective. But it's a bit like a light show in a sense. It's to go with the dynamics and certainly I know with a load of Rush tracks and certainly with Howard's, it often feels like when we want to start a track, we want to start the mood, create the mood, and so particularly with on Howard's songs like Hide and Seek, it is very much set around an immediate atmospheric mood that draws you in, and so with Rush, I think that there might have been some influence, but I wasn't that familiar with their previous works. I listened to most of it once, but so I wouldn't know whether there was an influence from their previous works or whether we did bring something in. It's hard to say. I like to, funnily enough, one thing I generally say to people is that I don't listen to a ton of other people's works because I mean, I hear them from time to time for whatever reason, but I try not to get too influenced by what other people are doing or how they're presenting it. I like to um, try and project my instinctive sort of feeling for how things should work. So,
Speaking of how things should work, one thing I
yeah.
definitely want to cover for people watching this is what you can tell us about your methodology. So, you get some individual tracks in, stems or just complete, like the master tapes and unlabeled or whatever. Like, so like when you are onboarded with a project and it's your role to produce 5.1 mixes, can you just kind of walk people through like what's that like?
Well, it's actually a very interesting thing. I get brought in specifically, if you like, to do a version in surround and stereo. That's kind of what I've been asked to do. So my first question to the people involved, and normally I'm only dealing with the label. It's very rare that I actually have a close connection to the artist, although we do get feedback at some point. But normally this is sort of not done without their consent. It's they don't know what they're going to expect. So if I'm told it needs to stay fairly faithful to the original, but we're just expanding it into 5.1. That is the main motive. The stereo mix is more of a bonus. The original stereo exists. So I'm not trying to recreate it. I'm not trying to better it. What I'm trying to do is create the 5.1. While you're doing the 5.1, you might as well do a stereo version. So the 5.1 is the thing. So I usually get digital transfers from the original tapes, because a lot of these projects most of them I'm doing are from the 70s. I'm just doing some from the late 60s at the moment as well, but we'll talk about that another time. But in the beginning of the 70s, a lot of this material was done on 8-track, and then as things progressed, they'd be 16-track, 24-track. Like these Howard Jones ones were done on analog 24-track. Rush was done on 32-track digital. But you know, like the Hawkwind album I did from last year, it was all on 8-track, you know.
Space
So
Ritual.
Space Ritual, yes. So uh, you have to see what the content is. With something that's recorded, you know, sort of further down the line, you'd have the drums, the bass, the guitars, the keyboards, the vocals, all on separate tracks, and the drums would be on multiple tracks. So you'd have the kick drum, the snare drum, the tom-toms, the overhead cymbals. But when you go back to you know, some of the early, like things like Moody Blues or Hawkwind, and with Hawkwind's Space Ritual Live, the drums were on one track, the bass was on one track, the guitar was on one track, the audience was on 2 tracks, the vocals were. Do you know what I mean? It's like things were fairly committed,
Yeah.
and occasionally you had more than one instrument on one track. But so anyway, my first thing is I listen to the original. I try and sort of roughly recreate it. Not, I don't try to copy it, but I roughly recreate it. So I'll listen to how things were positioned in the original stereo, and I'll try and replicate that roughly. Maybe there's some effects or things that I try to recreate. So I do that until I've got everything in place. And then I don't listen to the original after that. I then try and think, what would I do? What would I have done? Even thinking back, it kind of helps in a sense that my whole attitude started when a lot of these records were being made. So I understood the techniques and the whole philosophy and the way things were recorded and how effects were created and all the rest. So so I then sort of rebuild it. I'm, I'm working in a surround sound format, but at the beginning, I'm either listening in stereo speakers or in headphones, just to get things in the rough position.
Are you working in Pro
So
Tools, or what is your platform?
Pro Tools, Pro Tools, Pro Tools. Because of my past, where I come from the analog world, Pro Tools is the, if you like, the one digital audio workstation, as they call it. It's the one that has the most sort of reference back to the signal flow. It has like a console layout. It has the way you can look at the waveforms and for editing and things like that. It just feels very familiar to somebody who's worked on tape machines and recording consoles. So Pro Tools is very versatile in terms of working in surround sound, and these days in Atmos, and it just gives you all those options. And I work these days in the total digital world, in the box, as they call it.
Yeah.
Using plugins which are mostly emulations of the kind of analog gear I was using back in the day.
And again,
So
it's helpful that you know what that gear was.
it does, in a sense, because it helps to be able to reprocess things the way they would have been done then. If you
Yeah.
want to try and get close to it,
Sure.
I'm not saying I don't. I do use modern techniques as well. Certainly for cleaning things up these days, which is good because a lot of these older recordings had problems and distortion and build from one instrument to another, and you know, bad recordings, and so you're able to do a lot with that these days.
So that might be
But
how your stereo remix may actually be, you know, a unique listening experience as opposed to the original. Like you have a chance to go and, as it were, correct some of those issues that maybe couldn't have been at the time.
you can. I'm not saying I want to go in and fix everything, but sometimes I hear out of tune instruments sometimes on recordings, and I know that things back then it was hard to fix them at the time, and you didn't always have, studio time is expensive. You didn't always have time to go back and fix things.
Yeah.
So um, I like to bring that to it, but without being too analytical, but just trying to do what I felt instinctive. And as I say, I work totally in the digital world because now it means I can work on, and this is different to the original. When I was, for instance, working on Howard Jones' first album, you could work on each track doing the overdubs and things, but when you got to the mixing stage, you'd start the mix and you'd work on it till it was finished and complete, and then you'd move to the next song and you'd work on that and you'd work until it was complete, because there was no memory in the equipment. You had to sort of go with the instinct and reset it to start the next track.
Sure.
But what now, working in this way, I can take an album and I can work on all the tracks simultaneously,
Yeah.
to get the sort of flow. And I even quite early, when I have a first draft of every song, I put them into the running sequence so that I can listen to them in context to get the flow. And that's where I often feel I can get a better flow than the original. I'm not saying I get better mixes. I'm never trying to replace what went before. I'm just trying to.
Better is subjective anyway, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a few minutes remaining, and I want to cover 3 things. Okay,
Okay.
I see De Capo back behind you.
Yes.
So I just want to alert viewers that you are actually an artist in your own right. I
Yes.
actually really like that album,
Oh, fantastic.
including the surround mix. And
Yeah.
so I want to, just give an opportunity for you to just, mention
Yes.
what your art is like, and then I also want to make sure that we, if there's any kind of, teasers that you can give for what you're up to next. And finally, I would love to just, get a couple of recommendations from you, like what are multi-channel releases that you have mixed that you would point viewers to, like they should start there to
Okay.
get a taste for what you do.
Okay. Well, you asked me about Da Capo. I've made 2 solo albums, one called Ostinato, and the second one called Da Capo. And I'll talk about Da Capo now. Those are both musical terms used in musical terminology on musical manuscripts.
Right.
Ostinato means to be repetitive. Da Capo means back to the beginning. Uh, uh, my Da Capo project, the idea of that, I wanted to create, doing my sort of atmospheric. There's airs of minimalism in my music. It's atmospheric and ambient in a lot of senses. But the idea for Da Capo from the outset was to create an event which was going to be a performance with surround sound of my music with projections. That's where it started. So as I was writing the music, I was creating the idea for the visuals, and and I built that all around. They're all the subjects are on time and memories and situations. And so it's all about creating moods. I use sound itself as an instrument in a sense. There are sound effects and sound fields. I play all the instruments because I'm a trained musician. I play keyboards, I play woodwind, clarinet, and penny whistles and recorders, and guitar, and I use my voice as an instrument, and it's all atmospheric and moody, and that gave me an opportunity with Da Capo to create that. So it's hard to say what it's like. That some people might say there's elements of Philip Glass or Terry Riley in what I do. So
I think people should just listen to it. I think it's actually like a pretty dope record, and I totally recommend it.
It's a mood. It's something you put on and get in the mood.
Yeah, and
Hopefully,
there's
you get drawn in.
sometimes
Yeah,
that's what I want, you know.
yeah.
All right, so what are some mixes of yours that you would want to point viewers to first? Where should they start?
Well, I mean, it's always hard for me to come up with to say something's a favorite, but I think things of interest. I would recommend listening to Porn Hearts from Van de Graaff Generator. That was something that was recorded at Trident Studios before I joined them in the early 70s. And the original version was so crazy in terms of the sound and the effects and the stereo positioning and all the rest. And also the arrangements, the instruments they were using, the electric saxophone, uh, Hammond organ pedal bass notes, and instead of bass guitar, and great drumming and crazy vocals. And I just thought I want to be inspired by the original. And I think the way that's turned out in terms of absolutely enveloping, interesting things to listen to. So I'd recommend that. The other thing, again, it depends perhaps what your tastes are, but Bass Ritual from Hawkwind is a live album. And what we've tried to do with that, because it's like a 2 hour live show, and you can listen to it on Blu-ray in from start to finish, and just get totally into the mood. And it's psychedelic, and so we've tried to do something psychedelic with that. The band is still mostly in front of you, but there's all this wild electronics and stuff.
I have it,
Um,
and I
yeah,
actually have listened to it, and I can vouch it literally is a trip.
so
It's
those two I mentioned because they are, if you like, they're somewhat really experimental and brave in surround. There are others from bands like Bebop Deluxe that and Camel that are a bit more conventional, but still it opens up the world. But it depends what your tastes are. And of course, with these Howard Jones, I would recommend listening to those if you're into that kind of 80s thing, because I think this really works.
heck yeah. So it's cool that there's actually like a significant variety that people can choose from, like including your
Yeah,
own work. And
yeah,
then, this the prog stuff and some pop
yeah.
stuff. My personal fave that just always will come straight to mind is Axe Victim by Bebop Deluxe. Uh,
Fantastic.
that's
Yes.
that's when your work definitely got my attention.
Oh, well,
And
that's brilliant. Yeah,
yeah, so I think those are some solid recommendations. And the cool thing about the Van de Graaff Generator release is that you can get it in the huge box set, which I have, and I think that allows you to listen via Blu-ray. But then those albums were also released individually on DVD, if I remember correctly.
they were. And this is an issue. Sometimes people only want to get hold of this content. I think now they might actually be starting to think along those lines, but with Blu-ray rather than DVD. But in that case, with Van der Graaf, it's quite nice to have the choice, if you like, with Blu-ray in the box set, DVD standalone. So
Yeah, for
it,
sure.
yeah,
Or Blu-ray standalone. That's brilliant too.
yeah.
So you had just reminded us of the upcoming Howard Jones albums. You let us know that we're not only going to get the debut, but the second album as well.
That's right. They're coming out on the same date. They're both due for release on the 31st of May.
I did not see the news about the second album, so thanks for the heads up. It's now
Yeah, yeah.
officially on my radar, and for others watching.
You
And
you can find the link. You can find the links on my Facebook page.
okay,
Anybody wants to have a look. Yeah,
perfect, perfect. And then I'm sure it's up on quadrophonicquad.com as well. And I'll make sure
yeah.
that I put it up on Life and Surround Facebook as well.
Brilliant.
So what can you tell us? Like, what are you up to next? I know you can't
Well,
give away any secrets,
it's always
but
tough. I mean, I can tell you one that's been vaguely announced somewhere at the moment. But I've done yet another album from Hawkwind called "In Search of Space," which was uh, actually, I think it was 2 albums before Space Ritual, and it's a lot of the core material that wound up being done on the live show at
Oh,
Space
wow.
Ritual.
Oh, that's going to be interesting for
But
sure.
that's turned out really. I had such fun with doing that, and I think that again has translated really well into surround. I'm sorry, but at this stage, particularly when there are 5 projects waiting for announcement, um, other than just the ones that we've discussed already, and a couple of them are absolutely iconic. So um, we'll just have to speak again in a few weeks.
Hey, that's a
Let's
good problem
stay
to
in
have.
touch.
Okay,
Let's
that's a
stay in touch. And I'm about to start some new ones as well. So it just keeps on coming. I'm having the time of my life.
I would be delighted to speak again soon. And we've
Yeah,
given people some really good teasers already, and then that's really exciting to know that there's iconic stuff in the pipeline. So hey, I'm just gonna thank you for your time, Mr. Taylor. This has just
yeah.
been just so cool for me to be able to talk to you, and I'm sure that it's going to just be rewarding and enjoyable for Life and Surround viewers. And I hope that there are some people who like maybe weren't aware of your work, like they've heard your work but didn't know who did it. Or
Yeah,
I'm gonna do my best to link in the description a way that can point people to your discography.
thank you. Yes,
And
yes.
really, really excited about the Howard Jones albums coming out. That I was so excited about it. That's finally what, like, I was like, man, I know we tried to like talk like a few months back and stuff, but like
Yeah,
I gotta reach out again. I'm just super thrilled. So I will definitely be devouring those, reviewing them, and I would absolutely be delighted to speak with you again. When the time is right, when the project calls for it, and at your convenience. I would love to have you back.
brilliant. Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure talking about this. And as I say, anytime you want to talk, there's so much to tell. I mean, from different stages of my career that might be of interest. So thanks a lot.
Perfect. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I just want to finally thank everyone watching. So thank you for doing so. And do all the stuff, like, subscribe, notification bell, comments, and I look forward to having Mr. Taylor back, and look forward to interacting with all of you and to consuming this amazing body of work and enjoying it together. So thanks everyone, and until next time, live life in surround.